What's up guys? So I wanted to give a final update on the Shred build after pushing it as far as I wanted to and seeing how it did. I was quite happy with how it performed overall. It did pretty much what I was looking for. It was able to push up into the sort of mid 60s nightmare dungeons. I think with a little more optimization, you could probably get it into the low 70s. But there's definitely some big glaring weaknesses with Shred, but there's also some great strengths, mainly being that it is a very fast build. I really enjoyed this for Helltides. I know a lot of people have to fight mobs and mount up, get off your mount. This build can just stay in werewolf form and move from pack to pack, constantly teleporting them, the max move speed in direwolf. It was really enjoyable for Helltides. Also, in just kind of dungeon farming, I know Blizzard has been nerfing normal dungeons lately, but if you're doing like low nightmare dungeons or just normal dungeon farming, or maybe you're leveling up friends and stuff like that, this was incredibly enjoyable. You can pretty much just hold down right click and you will just fly all over the place. Super chill. I really liked that. Some of the weaknesses though, I noticed was whenever you started kind of pushing in nightmare dungeons, you started to become quite squishy, but you can actually get pretty tanky with the build. The drawback is you kind of have to trade off a lot of your damage for that, which I kind of found that middle ground of I'm doing enough damage to get that first kill and then having the waxing gibbous crit kind of carry me through. But once you kind of don't kill the monster right away, you'll start to notice that the single target damage is not the greatest. It's not terrible. Lupine Ferocity really helps out with that overall, but you can get it quite tanky, I'll be honest. I was pretty much able to just kind of stand and face tank a lot of stuff. Masochistic is extremely strong, especially when you're using like Tempest Roar with Hurricane and things like that. You get access to Storm Strike damage reduction. I think Tempest Roar is not even the best version of the build. I think a helmet with cooldown reduction and health, willpower, and armor can actually outpace this build. The problem is you pretty much just lose access to a lot of stuff on the skill tree. The pure werewolf build really leaves a lot to be desired when you're putting points in. You kind of run into a point where you just don't have anywhere to put your points. You could also run a non-grizzly rage version, but being permanently unstoppable, having high move speed, low spirit cost reductions, it pretty much solves almost every issue the Druid has right now. So when and if that does get nerfed, it's gonna feel kind of rough. Being a pure melee character can also be kind of tricky. You pretty much have to dive into the middle of all the enemies and hope you don't die before they die. The nice thing about Shred though is it gives you so much mobility through the move speed and the sort of blinks that you can move in and out very quickly and very easily, which made it one of the more enjoyable melee versions of a class I've got to play. It's kind of like a rogue with less direct movement cooldowns because you kind of need someone to jump to. With that though, I ended up dropping Ghost Walker off my boots for the pushing build and I put on Dark Howl, which allowed me to run Debilitating Roar. The problem with Debilitating Roar is the more ranks you put into it, the less and less cooldown reduction you get. So it's pretty hard to get it really low. But again, if you ran that cooldown reduction helmet, you could get it quite low. And it's a nice button where you kind of kill a weaker monster. And then as soon as you jump into the pack of the elites with your crit buff, you use Debilitating Roar so that you can have damage reduction on them. And you can kind of stand there and face tank until your crit damage wears out. With that in mind though, having to kill something and then jump into a pack of monsters does make it tough for pushing. But like I said, I really did like it for lower level content, speed farming, things like that. I wish Blizzard would allow us to have some sort of preset or saved builds that we could switch between. I would absolutely love to just throw this on anytime a Helltide pops up and go farm it, but then be able to switch back to say like a Stormwolf build for pushing higher nightmare dungeons. Overall, the build was quite fun to play. There are some few issues here and there, but if you like Shred, I thought this was a great option. I also think the poison version of Shred is certainly viable, but requires a little more setup and stuff. Maybe once they nerf Grizzly Rage, you could use Poison Creeper to take advantage of that. Rabies is okay, but still not a big fan of it myself. And with how few werewolf specific things there are in the skill tree, Tempest Roar just kind of gives you the ability to just put your skill points into more things. I want to go over the kind of final version of the build I settled on for pushing nightmare dungeons, and then I'll show you guys the non-unique version that I talked about in the last video. I mentioned this before, but make sure you're always checking the notes section of my build guides. I'm trying really hard to put a lot of useful information in here. You can see links to the speed version of the build that I did. So if you're looking for a more offensive version, make sure you go to this video. Here's the link to the pre-unique build that we'll talk about later in the video, where I think it can push in terms of nightmare dungeons, highlighted in Helltides, some of the strengths, the weaknesses, and then down at the bottom, I'm trying really hard to include the stats you want to look for on each piece of gear, or if there'll be a unique in that slot that you can use and take advantage of. Taking a look at the skill tree, it's pretty much the same as how I had it before. We're using Storm Strike with Tempest Roar to give us access to vulnerable and the damage reduction. This is part of the reason we're running Tempest Roar, and if we do drop Tempest Roar, we're going to have a tough time keeping vulnerable up. We're only going to have the exploit glyph, so it's only for like the first 3 seconds you fight something. You lose out on this damage reduction. It does make it a lot tougher to play melee without it. In here, we have Heart of the Wild, Wild Impulses. Spirit isn't really a big issue with Shred because of the way Shred works. Whenever you use Shred, it consumes Spirit on the first attack, and then the next 2 attacks do not consume Spirit. So this isn't bad. We have the upgrade into Primal Shred, which gives us not only the dashes, but additional critical strike damage, which is amazing with Waxing Gibbous, giving us 100% crit. We have crit against close enemies. This is for when we need to get that initial kill, and we don't have the Waxing Gibbous proc up yet, along with movement speed to hit the movement speed cap. You won't hit the movement speed cap if you go for the tankier version, but it is still good to have movement speed. Down here, we have the Blood Howl combo. Whenever we kill, we get a reset. And then we have attack speed, which combos with Vigilance, giving us damage reduction. And now I ended up putting Dark Howl on my boots for pushing higher Nightmare dungeons. Ghostwalker is great for the movement speed and the phasing, but it's not really as needed since you can kind of blink around to all the monsters and you have high movement speed anyway. We have a little bit of Fortify here. Fortify is pretty solid in this build. I didn't really have any issues keeping my Fortify up, but this is pretty much so that when you dive into a pack of the elites, you can instantly pop this, and hopefully within those 4 seconds, you're looking to get at least a couple kills, if not everything. Moving down here, we have the Hurricane. Again, this is because of Tempest Roar. This is another 20% damage reduction. Makes it really, really hard to drop Tempest Roar in a melee specific build, because this is just great synergy with everything we're doing in the build already. Because of that, we have increased duration of Hurricane over here. This also gives us a tiny chance for Hurricane to apply vulnerable. So if we don't have Tempest Roar, we lose all of this and we lose Storm Strike, and there's just really nowhere else to put the points. You can see down here, we have some poison stuff. Poison enemies are slowed, which gives us access to crowd control. And then whenever we crit, we apply poison, which is a slow, which is a crowd control. So the combo's there. Envenom is super, super big in this build. Very good. And you can see down here, I pretty much just put more points into Fortify. I even put this here, reduce the duration of control and parrying effects. We're unstoppable whenever we're in Dire Wolf. So this doesn't get a lot of value, but then when you're not in Dire Wolf, if you do get CC'd, you're generally going to be fortified, so the crowd control duration is less. There's really just nowhere to put points for Werewolf. It feels pretty bad. And again, if you drop the Tempest Roar and the Storm stuff, there's really not a ton of options. Rabies just doesn't feel super great in this kind of build. You can't really use companions because you're in Dire Wolf. So yeah, you could look to maybe take like Earthen Bulwark or Cyclone Armor. Cyclone Armor will work when you're in Grizzly Rage, even if it's not on your bar. And then Earthen Bulwark you could use whenever you're not in Grizzly Rage for the Unstoppable. But again, it's pretty tough. We have Grizzly Rage here into the Dire Wolf aspect. And again, I'm still really liking Lupine Ferocity. Every 6 werewolf skill critically strikes and deals increased damage. This helps, it works really well with attack speed, and it helps get our rampaging stacks up quickly because it's an automatic crit. The downside with this is if you are using Shred does 3 attacks, and then the 3rd attack is where the big damage is. So if you walk up to a mob and you just start shredding, every 6th hit, so every 2nd final shred attack will get the damage bonus. The problem comes in when if you shred and you don't use all 3 hits because the monster dies or you have to walk away, this then gets kind of off balance, and then this crit is no longer on the 3rd hit, which is where the majority of the damage is. You can see the problem with Shred is there's a 50%, 70%, and then 120% hit. So trying to get it lined up to where you're only hitting with the 3rd attack and having Lupine on there. And then on top of it, if you hit with Storm Strike or Hurricane, those count as hits for Lupine. So it can kind of ramp it faster, but then you might miss the final hit on Shred. So there's just a lot of things going against Shred on top of being just melee only, no ability to attack from ranged at all. I felt like it was kind of fighting its way uphill already, but I think it still did pretty well for what it was. Going over the gear now, I didn't super get the gear min-maxed. I got it to where it felt pretty good, so you can definitely go up from here. Like I said, check the notes for which stats you're looking for and uniques and things like that. I was running the Tempest Roar on the helmet. Like I said before, you don't have to run Tempest Roar. You can run a normal rare helmet and then just drop the storm kind of stuff. Cooldown reduction, life. The normal helmets are actually pretty solid, so it's not bad, but this just gives us more value from our skill points, which felt better. You can run Mad Wolf's Glee on the chest piece. I know a lot of people were asking me about this. This kind of goes both ways, where generally this is pretty much just an offensive chest piece, and if you're pushing higher stuff, you're going to need a lot more defenses. But because we incorporated Dark Howl and Debilitating Roar into the build, it kind of doubles up a little bit. It does have damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, and then it gives us 3 ranks to Debilitating Roar. Because of Dark Howl, it will become a werewolf skill. So I was trying it out because I was like trying to find that balance of damage reduction and damage done. So I kind of like this. Otherwise, just a chest piece with tons of damage reduction with the vigorous aspect is really good. On the gloves, pretty straightforward. Shred, critical strike chance, attack speed. For the last one, we don't really need lucky hit in this build. I was trying storm skill cooldown reduction for more hurricane uptime. You could go crit damage on here. The problem is crit damage loses a lot of value in rampaging builds because your rampaging stacks get so high, but probably would still be better to go for that. On the pants, you can run Temerity in the slot if you have that, if you like that. Otherwise, just pants with tons of damage reduction. Disobedience is one of the best defensive aspects. I would recommend trying to keep this in one of these slots if possible and not running double uniques. So keep that in mind. On the boots, we have movement speed, willpower. You can go dodge, damage reduction, armor, pretty good options. Normally you would run Ghostwalker here, which I have in the other video. Make sure you check that. Or you can run Dark Howl here if you're looking to push and you want to use Debilitating Roar. Or if you're not using Tempest Roar, you pretty much only have like 2 abilities on your bar. So this gives you something else to click. The weapon still is Waxing Gibbous. I think this is the core of the build, but also kind of what holds the build back. If you see, one of the stats on it is life on kill. We don't really need that, so we're pretty much losing out on an entire damage line on this. Then we have damage to injured enemies, which kind of completely goes against what we're looking for, sort of. I mean, maybe you dive in, get a crit, and then they're almost dead, and then your next hit gets bonus damage to kill them. Close damage is pretty solid. Critical strike damage, again, doesn't feel great on this build. What we're missing here, the biggest one, there's no vulnerable damage on Waxing Gibbous. Feels kind of bad. There's no core skill damage. There's no willpower. So maybe this build would just be better without Waxing Gibbous. Not sure. I didn't get to test it. I wanted to use the unique. I did really, really enjoy it. I thought it was a cool unique. Again, I love this for speed farming, so it was pretty fun. On our amulet, we have +3 ranks to Envenom passive. This is the most important thing you want to look for. I ended up not moving Grizzly Rage off my amulet. Spirit started getting tougher to maintain the higher you went. But yeah, cooldown reduction and Envenom are the 2 most important things. Then you can look for damage reduction or damage depending on if you're going for pushing or faster content. On the rings, we have Rampaging. This is what gets us our tons and tons of crit damage. I know it says crit damage by 10% X, but it's only just 10% additive. So this goes up to 99 stacks, 990 crit damage. Vulnerable damage, crit chance. This has lucky hit chance on it. I would go for crit damage or physical damage, damage to poison enemies, things like that. And then I think life is pretty important on the rings, especially if you're like pushing and things like that. The other ring we have Stormclaw. I can't decide if I like Stormclaw or not. If you weren't running this, you could run, see, that's the thing, there's not many options. You can run Unsatiated, which kind of feels whatever. You can maybe run something for like resource, like Umbral to get on the poison slows. It was kind of tough. This felt really kind of awkward. I think I would have just preferred using like maybe even Edgemaster now that that's re-enabled could be better here. This feels great if the monsters are kind of clumped up on top of each other. As soon as you jump in, you get a nice kind of AoE around. But Blizzard seems to be reducing the amount of monsters in dungeons lately, so this is losing a lot of value. And then the proc itself can't crit because it's coming off of the damage of your shred. So if your shred crits, it's like pseudo critting because it's getting the damage, but then you kind of lose damage on Lupine. I couldn't really find this, and then that's the problem. There's not a lot of things for shred or werewolf in general. So I went with this, and it felt okay. On my offhand, again, you probably don't want lucky hit here. You would want critical strike chance instead. Cooldown reduction and then damage reduction. Damage reduction are very, very good. Retaliation is solid here. We constantly have our fortify up, so it feels really good. For the spirit boons, they felt okay. We have 10% damage reduction from elites here. And then recently I found out that this is actually only additive crit damage and not multiplicative crit damage as well. So apologies for that. So this actually isn't very good at all in rampaging builds. So we ended up going with attack speed, which is very good for this build. And We take 5% crit chance because there's really just not better options here. You could go for something like Bolster if you notice you're having issues keeping up your Fortify. You can definitely do that instead of the crit chance. It's weird because we have 100% crit chance a lot of the time, but then the times we don't have 100% crit chance, we kind of really want crit chance, but then we also crit every 6th hit. It's really awkward. The build, it definitely needs some help, but I kind of went with that for more consistency against single targets. Here we have Calamity, extend the duration of our Grizzly Rage ultimate, which feels pretty good. And then of course Masochistic, which is a large source of our self-healing, which feels really, really good. For the gems on gear, I'm still sticking with damage reduction while fortified. You can definitely change this to maximum life if you prefer. I really like the damage reduction myself. In the weapons, I was running critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. This comboed pretty well with the exploit glyph applying vulnerable. You could also go for critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies because you are applying a slow with your poison and neurotoxins, but I liked this one. And then in our jewelry, we are going with the armor gems. For the Paragon board, I did mention I went for a much more tankier route. This is based on Sanctum's Stormwolf defensive board. He's been doing an absolutely amazing job putting out very, very good Paragon boards and Druid builds that I've really taken a lot of inspiration from that and just kind of learned a lot from how to build my Paragon boards. So big shout out to him. We work our way up to the starter board. You can see now we're starting to grab armor and maximum life because this was more for like pushing higher nightmare dungeons to get more tanky. We still have exploit here for the glyph, which is pretty solid. Move our way up into the Lust for Carnage board. For the Lust for Carnage node, our crit with werewolf skills restored to spirit. From what I could tell, this did not work with Stormclaw, so I wasn't like double dipping on spirit, so that felt kind of bad, but and the shred itself doesn't have great AoE, so it didn't feel super good, but having 100% crit got us some spirit restored. Over here we have werewolf glyph, damage reduction, and then damage in werewolf. Then we want to move into this board second, the heightened malice board. We can get heightened malice down here. 3 or more poison enemies nearby. Remember, whenever we crit, we apply poison, so we can get this up a decent amount of the time. Then we have move our way over here through some poison and armor nodes, and then we have Fang and Claw. Bonus to magic nodes, you can see how we kind of path around through the magic nodes. I tried really hard to make sure I hit 440 intelligence and 450 dex, which you'll see in a second why we did that. So there might be like some slightly awkward nodes, but it ended up working out. So this gives us increased damage to enemies close to you, which they're always close. And then you want to actually move your way up to this board next, which is the inner beast board. The reason we go to this board second, you can see this allows us to hit the breakpoints on rare nodes in this board. So you can see I have enough willpower for these nodes. Here's the 440 int breakpoint I was going for, and then the 450 dex breakpoint. So in this tree, we were able to pick up a little more armor here, and then we can get some more armor, shape-shifting damage, attack speed feels really good on this build, and more armor. So again, we're trying to get as tanky as possible. Once you do this board as your third board after the starter board, you can move to any other ones next. Down here, we have the spirit glyph, which I was trying to squeak out some more damage, so I wanted to stick in another glyph over here. This is the constricting tendrils board you can see here. So we have a little bit of life, enough dex to hit the glyph. So this isn't super value here, but the main idea is just I wanted to hit another glyph. I actually ended up dropping Ancestral Guidance because the spirit just is really awkward in the build because you spend spirit on the first shred, but then not on the next two. So when you're in Grizzly Rage, you're really just not having good uptime on it. So I felt that this glyph was getting me more value than Ancestral Guidance. Over here, we stuck in another glyph. We have Undaunted, which gives us damage reduction while we're fortified. Again, remember, we're looking to try to get as tanky as possible for pushing nightmare dungeons. And then here we have damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, which whenever we dive into a pack, our exploit glyph applies vulnerable, which then means we're taking less damage. So the whole idea is we get a kill, we jump into the middle of the elites, and we try to kill them as fast as possible, taking as little damage as possible. And I thought it synergized really well with that. Then we move up here for a little bit. This is kind of, again, for just pushing. This has damage reduction while fortified. This was some of the Paragon tech Sanctum was talking about that I really liked. So I wanted to add that into my build as well. And it feels pretty good there. But yeah, overall, the Paragon fits pretty well. But again, this is a very tanky version of the build. And you'll definitely notice a lower amount of damage. So if you're looking for a high damage, faster build, make sure you go with my other video build. For the non-unique version of the build, remember what I mentioned, check the notes on my builds. A lot of people were asking where to find this. Look in the description down below, you'll find the build, and then I'll try to also link this one, but it's always check the notes section on my builds. You'll find a lot of stuff in there. You can see instead of Tempest Roar, we have Dark Howl on our helmet, which means we can keep Ghostwalker on our boots here. We have Disobedience and Vigorous, so no Mad Wolves or Temerity. So this is with no uniques whatsoever. We don't have Waxing Gibbous, we have Edge Masters instead. You could run something like Unsatiated, on your ring and then move retaliation over to your weapon if you would prefer. You can totally try a two-handed weapon, but I really liked the fast attack style and I like the cooldown reduction on the offhand for Grizzly Rage. So the way the build is set up is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 abilities we can use while in Grizzly Rage, well, one of them being Grizzly Rage. Debilitating Roar gets changed to a werewolf skill, so we can use this during Grizzly Rage. And then we have Earthen Bulwark. This is mainly for when you're not in Grizzly Rage and you get CC'd, you need to break out, or you need a little bit of defensives. There's not a ton of options with the build. Spirit Boons are kind of set up. We have Energize. I picked this mainly because I think people were having a little bit of trouble with Spirit. So early on, this might help you out, even though you don't have a lot of lucky hit. Like on gear, this will still give you like a little bit of boost. I think I thought about keeping Avian Wrath here just because you probably aren't getting as much crits, but I think attack speed is probably just going to end up feeling better early on, so I'm going to put that there. The problem with attack speed is the faster you attack, the more spirit you spend, so you start to run into a little bit of spirit problem, so it's kind of a toss-up. Skill tree, pretty straightforward. You can look through here. We need to run Claw because we can't use Storm Strike. I threw a little bit of basic skills generate more spirit because, again, remember what I said, there's just not really a lot of options in the werewolf side of the tree. Claw also only generates 10 spirit, but it does have a little bit of increased attack speed and a chance to attack twice for more spirit, so we get a little bit more spirit regen there. Pretty much the same as the tree. We threw some points into Earthen Bulwark. Again, this is just some extra protection. Fortify, Unstoppable, get you out of CC if you get caught. We have Debilitating Roar, and then look at how empty it starts to get because there's just really nowhere to put points. Ended up putting a point in here. You could move like the basic attacks down here to unrestrained if you want to have a little bit of resistance against crowd control. I put a couple more points in Toxic Claws. This probably isn't that much damage, but again, the werewolf stuff is pretty tough. And then we finish out the build here. That's going to be it from me. Again, I really think this build was quite fun, but Shred just has a lot going against it. Overall, though, I think it performed exactly how I wanted it to. I was really happy with how it turned out, and I just wanted something different than Pulverize to play. I like Pulverize, but I wanted to try something else and see how it went, and I was pretty happy with it, especially with the Waxing Gibbous unique. I think it was a really cool playstyle. I still really enjoy it for Helltides. Hopefully Blizzard adds that option to save this build so I could just hop into it for Helltides, but until then, I'm probably going to look to try some other builds and see what I like. So, hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you ask down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer as many as I can, as always. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.